Getting into the more interesting cases now. Numbered company, Numbered Canada Inc., which is really a printer development company. Very interesting case here. In this case, the company had previously filed claims. It developed a new printer. It was accepted as filed in 2007 and 2008. In 2008, they went into production, small batch production, 200 printers, we're told they printed. So, I mean, that almost looks like an alpha or a beta prototype batch, whatever. Court didn't get into it. And after the printers were released, they experienced a whole bunch of problems. So they tested 50 printers and determined that there was paper was curling, and the battery, it was a battery-powered portable printer, and the battery was stopping after less than the 20 pages that they wanted, after 5 to 10 pages. Because there was problems in the dynamics that was putting too much load on the battery, static friction, dynamic friction. They were very technical issues, and they got into it. So the client, in his 2009 and 2010 year, looked to fix that and spent enough money to generate roughly 150,000 of ITCs. I think they were in Quebec, but I think these would just be federal ITCs, so significantly more than that. Usually when they talk about the tax cases, they're only talking about federal tax, not provincial credits. Okay? So the RTA came in at the time and said that because they'd released it to commercial production, there could not be any technological uncertainty. No. If there was technological uncertainty, they wouldn't. So it's kind of the commercial sale of something that's negating the eligibility of the science. And this is a mistake that I see often, sadly, with CRA reviewers. And when I look at this case further, let's look at what position this person had in the CRA. It's frightening. This is frightening. Okay, so they said that because you released it commercially, there could never be any technological uncertainty, so forth. Forget about incremental improvements, nothing. Therefore, it's denied. Now, keep in mind, this taxpayer had to go to court to win this. Not objections, not secondary review. Think of how far this went. So let me take a step back to imagine that this went to court. This went to court. The CEO, Raj Tooley, Chief Executive Officer, holds over 100 patents. He's got a degree in applied sciences. He holds 9 patents on printers alone. He's in the Guinness Book of Records for the biggest printer ever done that prints high quality blueprints. He's definitely qualified to do SR&ED, okay? I mean, of all the battlefronts to pick, I'm looking at this thinking, man, what was the CRA thinking here? But let's go a little further. Let's look at the reviewer, the RTA. Mr. Wisbecka, I'm not sure how to say it. Doctorate in electrical engineering. Okay? Another very skilled engineer here. So he's a professional engineer. He's got a PhD in engineering, 20 years experience. While working out in industry, he developed a photoplotter. I'm not sure what a photoplotter is, but it's probably similar to a printer. So he's very, very familiar with the kind of technology, or I'd assume, that printers are developed with. Okay? So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, well, this is exciting. It's like Clash of the Titans building up here. As I'm reading this case, I'm like, whoa, I can't sleep now. Okay? So I'm saying, oh, this is going to end bad. This is going to be a train wreck no matter what happens. All right. So I'm thinking, well, maybe this is a junior guy. This is a guy who was actually promoted to the position of national. This is the guy teaching all the other RTAs what to do. This is how high up these problems are. This is, to someone in my position, this is frightening. This is like a horror show. Why is someone at this level, how could they not understand how SR&ED works? Literally, it's not like he's a brand new RTA. Okay, I could make a mistake. This is the top guy. Okay, so anyways, we continue on. So the RTA basically said that if the client considered the functionality accomplished in 28, it was accomplished, and the fact that there were more problems is irrelevant. He said it was done, it was done. No credits. And again, the taxpayers go into tax court over this. This sounds funny until you realize that this guy had to go to tax court to protect his rights. Okay, so the problem here is that Mr. Wisbecca, the RTA, when he approved, he was the same fellow who approved the 2007 and 2008 claims. He approved the first 2 years of the project, but denied the next 2 years. He, under testimony, said that he thought Mr. Tooley was the #1 expert in the world. He was the top guy in the entire world on how to do this. And at the same time, he's saying it's routine. He's not arguing his qualifications or anything. He says, this is the best guy in the world. This guy knows more than anyone. Okay? So the own RTA set up the expert witness for the client pretty good. He says, this is the best expert that there ever was. So Mr. Tooley came in and said, in his view, the uncertainties existed. Paper was curling. There were problems that were originally encountered but just weren't taken as seriously. Now they recognize the seriousness of the problem. He said that standard engineering procedures were not available, and if they had been, he would have it going by now. Now, he didn't provide the evidence of this, and that's again where I'm saying, had he done some kind of simple 20-minute prior art search like what we're showing here, this wouldn't have gone to court. This would have been a slam dunk assess as filed. If you don't do the prior art search, no matter how good you are, it's not going to be good enough.
To him, it's common knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you get someone who's got 20 years experience in that field, everything looks, it's just a printer. Of course you're going to do that. Yes, Harvey?
Was prior art searching available then?
Well, you're right.
This is 2009, 2010.
Well, Google search was always there. You know, did we have the prior art search? It wasn't as easy or as efficient as now, but it was there.
I read the case, and my understanding of Mr. Wisbecca, he was involved in a whole bunch of other background and other things, and it was their attitude that once something was into commercial production, it was out. Period.
That seems to be a theme that I'm seeing as a major problem.
But
and
he was responsible for that policy.
yeah, and that's why I'm saying that we've got senior CRA officials that are enforcing stuff that's not in line with the legislation at all. This isn't the only CRA official. Sadly, there's more and more coming online all the time that take this kind of view. That not only that, if you have a customer who's paying for it, there can be no SR&ED is kind of the view I'm hearing. I'm saying, well, wait a sec. I always take a ridiculous. If you hired me, paid me $1 billion to build you a time machine so you could go back in time, and change things, because you paid me $1 billion, there's no technological uncertainty to do that anymore? And we can all laugh at that because that's ridiculous. But that's a silly statement to make, that because someone paid you, the science is immediately erased because you're getting paid for it. I'd say it's the opposite. If someone's going to pay me a lot of money, there's probably a lot of science behind it because that's how complicated it is. My view of it is exactly counter what the CRA's position here is. And when I see national technology specialists, trainers, telling other RTAs this is not acceptable for the system. This will destroy the whole system, having people with that level of competence at senior levels. So luckily, the tax courts are our final savior against things like this.
They consider 50 units commercial production for a printer?
200 units. They put 200 in.
I could see 200,000 units.
That's what I thought. I thought 200 units for a printer is a test batch. But anyways, I'm just going on the facts of the case. I mean, as ridiculous as they seem.
People joining online are asking that you repeat what is being said because they're...
Yes, I'm sorry. Sorry, the comment was that a release of 200 printers doesn't seem like even commercial release. And that could be a point as well, that's almost like a prototype or beta release or alpha release or whatever terminology you might want to look at. So let's go in and say, well, what could Mr. Tully have done here to save himself some problems? So if we go in, I would look at how are we going to outline that project to begin with. So on my key criteria summary, I'd say, well, he's outlined 4 specific activities within the project. And what he didn't do is talk about benchmarking. So had he gone through and said, well, I looked at 100 articles, 14 patents, competitive product, any number of things, we would have been okay. You know, that probably would have said at home, we wouldn't have been in tax court, and we wouldn't get to learn and discuss all these things. Okay? So one, what were our benchmarking sources? Two, do we have quantifiable objectives? Again, he didn't provide any. What I did is I went in and I said, well, here's probably, you know, if I was developing a printer and I looked at other competitive printers, what are their performance things? What do they list and why I should buy them? So I'm saying, well, you know, battery life, jam rate. One of the things that they don't list but was in here is ambient humidity. When it was getting too humid, the paper was jamming or causing problems. So you know, what range do we want to go to? Media thicknesses. So upper and lower, how thin a paper, how thick a paper can I handle? Upper and lower ranges. Speed. They talk about the felt life, so they use some kind of felt buffers in between the clutch, and it was wearing out improperly, and they used different types of felt that were cheaper but actually performed better unexpectedly. So the properties of the felt, the medium itself, how long it was lasting. And then you know, cost would always be one. They didn't say any of this, but you know, obviously if you have unlimited, if I can build this for $1,000, it's going to be a lot less problems if I have to build it for $80. I can use different components, I could use different things. Okay, so what I've done here is saying that, you know, what would happen is that you'd have your initial objectives, and then at each level you might get closer and closer or further away. So what were my results at the end of all this? Which ideally leads me to the conclusions. So some of the things that they identified, either in the case itself, or when I did my prior art search and said people who are developing similar things to what we've got here are facing these problems. So things like the clutch plate surface area. And do we use ridges, do we put any patterns on the surface to get more grip? Felt, it's friction, compression, degradation properties. They were talking about moisture versus an anti-curl mechanism. So how much moisture and what's the optimal anti-curl mechanism to deal with that? The design of the slip clutch itself, and they talk about how to deal with, method to deal with static versus dynamic loads, which were draining the battery and causing jams and all kinds of other problems. Okay? So, I mean, these are just hypothetical variables. I don't know what Mr. Tully's real variables were, but these would be ones that would be indicative of developing a printer based on the problems that other people in the prior art search have cited that they had to overcome. Okay? So again, how many alternatives did we look at? What methods did we use? And does that support more or less the man hours or costs? Does that look reasonable to us that that would have been incurred? So this is again how I'm saying, as practitioners or as claimants, you kind of want to have a grid or a SIF to say, are there any key weaknesses? You know, we didn't quantify objectives. We haven't identified and ranked variables of uncertainty that can't be predicted based on the standard practice. And if you have those weaknesses, that's where I'd like to focus on the descriptions, or I typically go in and say, look, we better tighten this up or really evaluate, do we want to claim this or not? Yes?
When you talk about analysis there, I mean, that comes up a lot in CRA reviews, how they like to see analysis. You've got 400 there. Are those like, what do you typically look for there? What's your suggestions? I mean, is that...
Yeah, sorry, this is just a summary. That's a great question, Jay. Let me...
Outside of this case, I
Yeah.
just thought...
No, so yeah, I'm kind of jumping to the summary of the way I would normally do it. So what I would do for each activity, or what I would recommend, is that, let me take a step back. I remember back in the 90s, I saw a client who submitted a project for over $1 million of cost, and it was a little over half a page. And it was assessed as filed, no problem. I remember thinking, wow, and it outlined the variables, prior art, and it was actually very interesting because the reviewer came out and he said, well, you know, did you build prototypes? Yeah, we built 43 different prototypes in 7 different classes. And it was using forms. Did you use forms? So, yeah. And he showed them and he said, well, okay, I understand the variables within each class, why you had to do it, because I used to do this kind of work. And looking at the pictures, I agree each prototype would be 500 to 600 man hours times 43. There's your $1 million, right? What if I thought I'd be clever? Because I want to be desk reviewed, right? I want someone to read it who's skilled in the art, 43, 500 million, give it to you. What if I said I did many, many prototypes? What's many, many times 500? Well, this is the problem. The answer is financial review, because they're gonna come and they're gonna find out what's many. You either tell them or they come in and you tell them. volunteer it up front. It's going to make everyone's job that much easier, right? Appreciate the CRA reviewer's job. They're reading your description, not only identifying if it's SR&D, but if the costs look grossly reasonable, right? The more evidence you can think of, what can I tell this person to allow them to very quickly assert whether I'm being reasonable or not, right? So how many alternatives? That's really important. And which one? If I analyze stuff, I might have a program that analyzes, I can do 100 analysis in seconds. But then let's say I look at 400 and then I go do trials out on the shop floor. Well, now I got people on machines. That takes time. I mean, I got a human factor in there, and then I got to change the machine and flush the machine and put it back into operate. That's not going to be hours. That's going to be tens or maybe hundreds of hours. And let's say, you know what? I can't tweak this line the way I thought. We tried, that's not going to work. But we got an idea. Let's scrap that line and we'll build a whole new one on a whole new concept. Well, now we're probably talking hundreds or thousands of man hours, right? And I mean, if it's a small prototype or big, the person would have to know what kind of thing you're building. But assuming that you make that clear to them or easy for them to figure that out, what I'm saying is you've made the reviewer's job that much easier because he or she can not only evaluate the SR&ED, but also the cost reasonableness, which is one of the parameters that they have to sign off on, right? So I don't want any excuses for this person to come out. I want to give them every single thing that they need, that as long as it's truthful, there would be no reason for them to come and visit my client. All right, sorry, does that answer your question, Jay? Okay, cool. So last part is you want to specify results. So how close am I getting? And every time you have a result, the result is just that. This is what happened. The more important part is the conclusion. So I'm at 20% of my goal on say battery life, and I attribute it that felt with cross webs works better than another kind of felt, or something like that. Who cares? Maybe I've exceeded. I'm only at 6% of my goal, or 15% of my goal, or 150%. So what? What I would argue is the further I am, if I'm at 100% of my goal every time, it makes it sound like I kind of knew what I was doing. That's a little bit of an argument that, hey, maybe I knew what the outcome, maybe this was routine for me. If I expect something and my result is 300% of expectation, I'm saying I should go into the conclusion and explain, how could something be 300% of what I expected? Obviously, I didn't appreciate the interrelations of something in there, right? So that's a very strong evidence that there is a conclusion that would lead to a technological advancement. And it's the conclusions that I'd say are the technological advancements, not the results. Okay? All right, so if we go back to the prior art search there, what I've done here is uploaded different documents. So I could say on static versus dynamic load, I have 4 documents. And maybe I want to go into them. What I've done here is a quick overview. So I've got competitive products from Brother or Apex. I've done my prior art search here. This is a little PowerPoint show of kind of how it worked. So I'd go in, I'd select my keywords, do my search by industry. So this just gives me a starting point. And then I use these basically menus to narrow in the search. So I might type new terms. I might switch it just to patents if I want. Once I find a similar product, I go down. I illustrate saying, maybe I have issues with the slip clutch here. So how did these guys use a slip clutch in this patent from 1961? Slip clutches aren't new. Here's a design, how they did it. 2-oiled felt disc. This sounds exactly like what we're doing. So if the reviewer came in and said, here's the solution, you would have to refute that this wouldn't work. Here, I would like to say this is where our starting point, but here's why this wouldn't work here. This is the things that we'd have to experiment. So we're skilled in the art. We're not starting from a blank point, but we're saying that this clutch feature, this design is a good starting point, but not exactly what we look for, right? So again, you'd come in and maybe use something like this, scroll down to the bottom and finish out the patent review, right? Lastly, you want to upload, you can print your top 50 list. I like to upload that right in there. So here's the top 10 of everything that we did for the search terms. Upload them into R&D base. And then most importantly, talk about which variables they're related to so that other users now on the team, let's say it's not just one person, we can all look at what did Joe here figure out about static versus dynamic load? So we can all start to compare our prior art documents and put our own reasons about how we should deal with this and talk about how Jim had a good idea, better than Bonnie's idea or worse or vice versa. But the point is that we're discussing it, and this is all strong evidence of supporting experimentation. If it's a routine answer, we're going to get right to it. If the development team's skilled in the art and they still are pondering these kinds of issues, this is all the kind of evidence I'd say would be critical to the SR&ED and may also help us to lead to patent or other intellectual property protection if in fact the product's successful at the end of the day.